Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead?
A Visitor from Down Under by L.P. Hartley. And who will you send to fetch him away? After a promising start, the March day had ended in a wet evening. It was hard to tell whether rain or fog predominated. The loquacious bus conductor said, "Foggy evening," to those who rode inside, and a wet evening to such as were obliged to ride outside. But in or on the buses, cheerfulness held the field, for their patrons, inured to discomfort, made light of climatic inclemency. All the same, the weather was worth remarking on. The most scrupulous conversationalist could refer to it without feeling self-convicted of banality. How much more the conductor, who, in common with most of his kind, had a considerable conversational gift. The bus was making its last journey through the heart of London before turning in for the night. Inside, it was only half full. Outside, as the conductor was aware by virtue of his sixth sense, there still remained a passenger too hardy or too lazy to seek shelter. And now, as the bus rattled rapidly down the Strand, the footsteps of this person could be heard shuffling and creaking upon the metal-shod stairs. "Anyone on top?" asked the conductor, addressing an errant umbrella point and the hem of a mackintosh. "I didn't notice anyone," the man replied. "It's not that I don't trust you," remarked the conductor pleasantly, giving a hand to his alighting fare, "but I think I'll go up and make sure." Moments like these, moments of mistrust in the infallibility of his observation, occasionally visited the conductor. They came at the end of a tiring day, and if he could, he withstood them. There were signs of weakness, he thought, and to give way to them a matter for self-reproach. "Going balmy, that's what you are," he told himself, and he casually took a fare inside to prevent his mind dwelling on the unvisited outside. But his unreasoning disquietude survived this distraction, and murmuring against himself, he started to climb the stairs. To his surprise, almost stupefaction, he found that his misgivings were justified. Breasting the ascent, he saw a passenger sitting on a right-hand front seat, and the passenger, in spite of his hat turned down, his collar turned up, and creased white muffler that showed between the two, must have heard him coming. For though the man was looking straight ahead, in his outstretched left hand, wedged between the first and second fingers, he held a coin. "Jolly evening, don't you think?" asked the conductor, who wanted to say something. The passenger made no reply, but the penny, for such it was, slipped the fraction of an inch lower in the groove between the pale, freckled fingers. "I said it was a damn wet night," the conductor persisted irritably, annoyed by the man's reserve. Still no reply. "Where you for?" asked the conductor, in a tone suggesting that wherever it was, it must be a discreditable destination. "Carrick Street." "Where?" the conductor demanded. He had heard all right, but a slight peculiarity in the passenger's pronunciation made it appear reasonable to him, and possibly humiliating to the passenger, that he should not have heard. "Carrick Street." "Then why don't you say Carrick Street?" the conductor grumbled as he punched the ticket. There was a moment's pause, then, "Carrick Street," the passenger repeated. "Yes, I know. You needn't go on telling me," fumed the conductor, fumbling with the passenger's penny. He couldn't get hold of it from above. It had slipped too far. So he passed his hand underneath the others and drew the coin from between his fingers. It was cold, even where it had been held. "No," said the stranger suddenly. "What do you know?" The conductor was trying to draw his fare's attention to the ticket, but could not make him look round. "I suppose I know you're a clever chap," he remarked. "Look here now. Where do you want this ticket? In your buttonhole?" "Put it here," said the passenger. "Where?" asked the conductor. "You aren't a blooming letter rack." "Where the penny was," replied the passenger, "between my fingers." The conductor felt reluctant. He didn't know why, to oblige the passenger in this. The rigidity of the hand disconcerted him. It was stiff, he supposed, or perhaps paralysed. And since he had been standing on the top, his own hands were none too warm. The ticket doubled up and grew limp under his repeated efforts to push it in. He bent lower, for he was a good-hearted fellow, and using both hands, one above and one below, he slid the ticket into its bony slot. "Right you are, Kaiser Bill." Perhaps the passenger resented this jocular allusion to his physical infirmity. Perhaps he merely wanted to be quiet. All he said was, "Don't speak to me again." "Speak to you?" shouted the conductor, losing all self-control. "Catch me speaking to a stuffed dummy!" Muttering to himself, he withdrew into the bowels of the bus. At the corner of Carrick Street, quite a number of people got on board. All wanted to be first, but pride of place was shared by 3 women, who all tried to enter simultaneously. The conductor's voice made itself audible above the din. Now then, look where you're shoving. This isn't a bargain sale. Gently, please, lady. He's only a poor old man." In a moment or two the confusion abated, and the conductor, his hand on the cord of the bell, bethought himself of the passenger on top, whose destination Carrick Street was. He'd forgotten to get down. Yielding to his good nature, for the conductor was averse to further conversation with this uncommunicative fare, he mounted the streets, put his head over the top, and shouted, "Carrick Street! Carrick Street!" That was the utmost he could bring himself to do. But his admonition was without effect. His summons remained unanswered. Nobody came. "Well, if he wants to stay up there, he can," muttered the conductor, still aggrieved. "I won't fetch him down, cripple or no cripple." The bus moved on. "He slipped by me," thought the conductor, while all that cup-tie crowd was getting in. The same evening, some 5 hours earlier, a taxi turned into Carrick Street and pulled up at the door of a small hotel. The street was empty. It looked like a cul-de-sac, but in reality it was pierced at the far end by an alley, like a thin sleeve, which wound its way into Soho. "That the last, sir?" inquired the driver, after several transits between the cab and the hotel. "How many does that make?" 9 packages in all, sir." "Could you get all your worldly goods into 9 packages, driver?" "That I could. Into 2. "Well, have a look inside and see if I've left anything." The cabman felt about among the cushions. "Can't find nothing, sir." "What do you do with anything you find?" asked the stranger. "I take it to New Scotland Yard, sir," the driver promptly replied. "Scotland Yard?" said the stranger. "Strike a match, will you, and let me have a look." But he too found nothing, and reassured followed his luggage into the hotel. A chorus of welcome and congratulation greeted him. The manager, the manager's wife, the ministers without portfolio, of which all hotels are full, the porters, the liftman, all clustered around him. "Well, Mr. Rumbold, after all these years, we thought you'd forgotten us, and wasn't it odd? The very night your telegram came from Australia, we'd been talking about you, and my husband said, 'Don't you worry about Mr. Rumbold, he'll fall on his feet all right. Some fine day he'll walk in here a rich man.' Not that you weren't always well off, but my husband meant a millionaire." "He was quite right," said Mr. Rumbold, slowly savouring the words. "I am." "There, what did I tell you?" the manager exclaimed, as though one recital of his prophecy was not enough. "But I wonder you're not too grand to come to Rossall's Hotel." "I've got nowhere else to go," said the millionaire shortly, "and if I had, I wouldn't. This place is like home to me." His eyes softened as they scanned the familiar surroundings. They were light grey eyes, very pale, and seeming paler from their setting in his tanned face. His cheeks were slightly sunken and very deeply lined. His blunt-ended nose was straight. He had a thin, straggling moustache, straw-coloured, which made his age difficult to guess. Perhaps he was nearly 50. So wasted was the skin on his neck, but his movements, unexpectedly agile and decided, were those of a younger man. "I won't go up to my room now," he said, in response to the manageress's question. "Ask Clutsam. He's still with you? Good. To unpack my things. He'll find all I want for the night in the green suitcase. I'll take my despatch box with me, and tell them to bring me a sherry and bitters in the lounge." As the crow flies, it was not far to the lounge, but by way of the tortuous ill-lit passages, doubling on themselves, yawning with dark entries, plunging into kitchen stairs, the catacombs so dear to habitués of Rossall's Hotel, it was a considerable distance. Anyone posted in the shadow of these alcoves, or arriving at the head of the basement staircase, could not have failed to notice the air of utter content which marked Mr. Rumbold's leisurely progress, the droop of his shoulders acquiescing in weariness, the hands turned inwards and swaying slightly, but quite forgotten by their owner, the chin, always prominent, now pushed forward so far that it looked relaxed and helpless, not at all defiant. The unseen witness would have envied Mr. Rumbold, perhaps even grudged him his holiday airs, his untroubled acceptance of the present and the future. A waiter, whose face he did not remember, brought him the apéritif, which he drank slowly, his feet propped unconventionally upon a ledge of the chimney-piece, a pardonable relaxation, for the room was empty. Judge, therefore, his surprise when out of the fire-engendered drowsiness he heard a voice which seemed to come from the wall above his head. A cultivated voice, perhaps too cultivated, slightly husky yet careful and precise in its enunciation. Even while his eyes searched the room to make sure that no one had come in, he could not help hearing everything the voice said. It seemed to be talking to him, and yet the rather oracular utterance implied a less restricted audience, the utterance of a man who was aware that, though it was a duty for him to speak, for Mr. Rumbold to listen would be both a pleasure and a profit. "A children's party," the voice announced in an even, neutral tone, nicely balanced between approval and distaste, between enthusiasm and boredom. 6 little girls and 6 little... A faint lift in the voice, expressive of tolerant surprise. "Boys. The broadcasting company has invited them to tea, and they are anxious that you should share some of their fun." At the last word the voice became almost positively colourless. "I must tell you that they have had tea, and enjoyed it, didn't you, children?" A cry of "Yes," muffled and timid, greeted this leading question. "We should have liked you to hear our table talk, but there wasn't much of it. We were so busy eating." For a moment the voice identified itself with the children. "But we can tell you what we ate. Now, Percy, tell us what you had." A piping little voice recited a long list of comestibles, like the children in the treacle well, thought Rumbold. Percy must have been, or soon would be, very ill. A few others volunteered the items of their repast. "So, you see," said the voice, "we have not done so badly, and now we are going to have crackers, and afterwards—" The voice hesitated and seemed to dissociate itself from the words. "Children's games." There was an impressive pause, broken by the muttered exhortation of a little girl. "Don't cry, Philip, it won't hurt you." Fugitive sparks and snaps of sound followed, more like a fire being mended, thought Rumbold, than crackers. A murmur of voices pierced the fusillade. "What have you got, Alec? What have you got?" "I've got a cannon." "Give it to me." "No." "Well, lend it to me." "What do you want it for?" "I want to shoot Jimmy." Mr. Rumbold started. Something had disturbed him. Was it imagination, or did he hear, above the confused medley of sound, a tiny click? The voice was speaking again. "And now we're going to begin the games." As though to make amends for past lukewarmness, a faint flush of anticipation gave colour to the decorous voice. "We will commence with our old favourite, Ring a Ring of Roses." The children were clearly shy and left each other to do the singing. Their courage lasted for a line or two, then gave out. But fortified by the speaker's baritone, powerful though subdued, they took heart, and soon were singing without assistance or direction. Their light, wavering voices had a charming effect. Tears stood out in Mr. Rumbold's eyes. "Oranges and lemons" came next. A more difficult game, it yielded several unrehearsed effects before it finally got under way. One could almost see the children being marshalled into their places, as though for a figure in the lances. Some of them, no doubt, had wanted to play another game. Children are contrary, and the dramatic side of Oranges and Lemons, though it appeals to many, always affrights a few. The disinclination of these last would account for the pauses and hesitations which irritated Mr. Rumbold, who, as a child, had always had a strong fancy for this particular game. When, to the tramping and stamping of many small feet, the droning chant began, He leaned back and closed his eyes in ecstasy. He listened intently for the final accelerando which leads up to the catastrophe. Still, the prologue maundered on, as though the children were anxious to extend the period of security, the joyous, carefree promenade which the great bell of Bow, by his inconsiderate profession of ignorance, was so rudely to curtail. The bells of Old Bailey pressed their usurer's question. The bells of Shoreditch answered with becoming flippancy. The bells of Stepney posed their ironical query, when suddenly, before the great bell of Bow had time to get his word in, Mr. Rumbold's feelings underwent a strange revolution. Why couldn't the game continue all sweetness and sunshine? Why drag in the fatal issue? Let payment be deferred. Let the bells go on chiming and never strike the hour. But heedless of Mr. Rumbold's squeamishness, the game went its way. After the eating comes the reckoning. Here is a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head. Chop, chop, chop. The child screamed, and there was silence. Mr. Rumbold felt quite upset, and great was his relief when, after a few more half-hearted rounds of oranges and lemons, the voice announced, "Here we come gathering nuts in May." At least there was nothing sinister in that. Delicious sylvan scene, comprising in one splendid botanical inexactitude all the charms of winter, spring, and autumn. What superiority to circumstance was implied in the conjunction of nuts and May? What defiance of cause and effect? What a testimony to coincidence! For cause and effect are against us, as witness the fate of Old Bailey's debtor. But coincidence is always on our side, always teaching us how to eat our cake and have it. The long arm of coincidence, Mr. Rumbold would have liked to clasp it by the hand. Meanwhile, his own hand conducted the music of the revels, and his foot kept time. Their pulses quickened by enjoyment. The children put more heart into the singing. The game went with a swing. The ardour and rhythm of it invaded the little room where Mr. Rumbold sat. Like heavy fumes, the waves of sound poured in, so penetrating they ravished the sense, so sweet they intoxicated it, so light they fanned it to a flame. Mr. Rumbold was transported. His hearing, sharpened by the subjugation and quiescence of his other faculties, began to take in new sounds. The names, for instance, of the players who were wanted to make up each side, and of the champions who were to pull them over. For the listeners in, the issues of the struggles remained in doubt. Did Nancy Price succeed in detracting Percy Kingham from his allegiance? Probably. Did Alec Wharton prevail against Maisie Drew? It was certainly an easy win for someone. The contest lasted only a second, and a ripple of laughter greeted it. Did Violet Kingham make good against Horace Gold? This was a dire encounter, punctuated by deep, irregular panting. Mr. Rumbold could see in his mind's eye the two champions straining backwards and forwards across the white, motionless handkerchief, their faces red and puckered with exertion. Violet or Horace, one of them had to go. Violet might be bigger than Horace, but Horace was a boy. They were evenly matched. They had their pride to maintain. The moment when the will was broken and the body went limp in surrender would be like a moment of dissolution. Yes, even this game had its stark, uncomfortable side. Violet or Horace, one of them was smarting now, crying, perhaps, under the humiliation of being fetched away. The game began afresh. This time there was an eager ring in the children's voices. Two tried antagonists were going to meet. It would be a battle of giants. The chant throbbed into a war cry. Who will you have for your nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May? Who will you have for your nuts in May on a cold and frosty morning? They would have Victor Rumbold for nuts in May. Victor Rumbold, Victor Rumbold. And from the vindictiveness in their voices they might have meant to have his blood too. And who will you send to fetch him away, fetch him away, fetch him away? Who will you send to fetch him away on a cold and frosty morning? Like a clarion call, a shouted defiance, came the reply. We'll send Jimmy Hagbard to fetch him away, fetch him away, fetch him away. We'll send you me Hagber to fetch him away on a wet and foggy morning. This variation, it might be supposed, was intended to promote the contest from the realms of pretence into the world of reality, but Mr. Rumbold probably didn't hear that his abduction had been antedated. He had turned quite green, and his head was lolling against the back of the chair. "Any wine, sir?" "Yes, sir, Clutsam, a bottle of champagne." "Very good, sir." Mr. Rumbold drained the first glass at one go. "Anyone coming in to dinner beside me, Clutsam?" he presently inquired. "Not now, sir. It's 9 o'clock," replied the waiter, his voice edged with reproach. "Sorry, Clutsam, I didn't feel up to the mark before dinner, so I went and lay down." The waiter was mollified. "Thought you weren't looking quite yourself, sir. No bad news, I hope?" "No, nothing. Just a bit tired after the journey." "And how did you leave Australia, sir?" inquired the waiter, to accommodate Mr. Rumbold, who seemed anxious to talk. "It's better weather than you have here," Mr. Rumbold replied, finishing his second glass and measuring with his eye the depleted contents of the bottle. The rain kept up a steady patter on the glass roof of the coffee room. "Still, a good climate isn't everything. It isn't like home, for instance," the waiter remarked. "No, indeed. There's many parts of the world as will be glad of a good day's rain," affirmed the waiter. "There certainly are," said Mr. Rumbold, who found the conversation sedative. "Did you do much fishing when you were abroad, sir?" the waiter pursued. "A little." "Well, you want rain for that," declared the waiter, as one who scores a point. "The fishing isn't preserved in Australia like what it is here." "No, then there ain't no poaching," concluded the waiter philosophically. "It's every man for himself." "Yes, that's a rule in Australia." "Not much of a rule, is it?" the waiter took him up. "Not much like law, I mean." "Depends what you mean by law." "Oh, Mr. Rumbold, sir, you know very well what I mean. I mean the police. Now, if you was to have done a man out in Australia, murdered him, I mean, they'd hang you for it if they caught you, wouldn't they?" Mr. Rumbold teased the champagne with the butt end of his fork and drank again. "Probably they would, unless there were special circumstances. In which case, you might get off." "I might." "That's what I mean by law," pronounced the waiter. "You know what the law is. You go against it and you're punished. Of course, I don't mean you, sir. I only say you as an illustration to make my meaning clear. Quite. Whereas, if there was only what you call a rule," the waiter pursued, deftly removing the remains of Mr. Rumbold's chicken, "it might fall to the lot of any man to round you up. Might be anybody. It might be me." "Why should you or they," asked Mr. Rumbold, "want to round me up? I haven't done you any harm, or them." "Oh, but we should have to, sir." "Why?" "We couldn't rest in our beds, sir, knowing you was at large. You might do it again. Somebody'd have to see to it." "But supposing there was nobody?" "Sir?" "Supposing the murdered man hadn't any relatives or friends, supposing he just disappeared, and no one ever knew that he was dead?" "Well, sir," said the waiter, winking portentously, "in that case he'd have to get on your track himself. He wouldn't rest in his grave, sir. No, not he. And knowing what he did." "Clutsam," said Mr. Rumbold suddenly, "bring me another bottle of wine, and don't trouble to ice it." The waiter took the bottle from the table and held it up to the light. "Yes, it's dead, sir." "Dead?" "Yes, sir. Finished. Empty. Dead." "You're right," Mr. Rumbold agreed. "It's quite dead." It was nearly 11 o'clock. Mr. Rumbold again had the lounge to himself. Clutsam would be bringing his coffee presently. Too bad of fate to have him haunted by these casual reminders. Too bad. His first day at home. Too bad, he muttered, while the fire warmed the soles of his slippers. But it was excellent champagne. He would take no harm from it. The brandy Clutsam was bringing him would do the rest. Clutsam was a good sort, nice, old-fashioned servant, nice, old-fashioned house. Warmed by the wine, his thoughts began to pass out of his control. "Your coffee, sir," said a voice at his elbow. "Thank you, Clutsam, I'm very much obliged to you," said Mr. Rumbold, with the exaggerated civility of slight intoxication. "You're an excellent fellow. I wish there were more like you." "I hope so too, I'm sure," said Clutsam, trying in his muddle-hearted way to deal with both observations at once. "Don't see many people about," Mr. Rumbold remarked. "Hotel pretty full?" "Oh, yes, all the suites are let, and the other rooms too. We're turning people away every day. Why, only tonight a gentleman rang up, said he would come round late on the off chance, but bless me, you'll find the birds have flown." "Birds?" echoed Mr. Rumbold. "I mean, there ain't any more rooms, not for love nor money." "Well, I'm sorry for him," said Mr. Rumbold with ponderous sincerity. "I'm sorry for any man, friend or foe, who has to go tramping about London on a night like this. If I had an extra bed in my room, I'd put it at his disposal." "You have, sir?" the waiter said. "Why, of course I have. How stupid. Well, I'm sorry for the poor chap. I'm sorry for all homeless ones, Clutsam, wandering on the face of the earth." "Amen to that," said the waiter devoutly. "And doctors and such, pulled out of their bed at midnight. It's a hard life. Ever thought about a doctor's life, Clutsam?" "Can't say I have, sir." Well, but it's hard. You can take that from me." "What time shall I call you in the morning?" the waiter asked, seeing no reason why the conversation should ever stop. "You needn't call me, Clutsam," replied Mr. Rumbold in a sing-song voice, and running the words together as though he were excusing the waiter from addressing him by the waiter's own name. "When I'm ready, and that may be pretty late, pretty late." He smacked his lips over the words. "Nothing like a good lie, eh, Clutsam?" "That's right, sir. You have your sleep out," the waiter encouraged him. "You won't be disturbed." "Good night, Clutsam. You're an excellent fellow, and I don't care who hears me say so." "Night, sir." Mr. Rumbold returned to his chair. It lapped round him. It ministered to his comfort. He felt at one with it. At one with the fire, the clock, the tables, all the furniture. Their usefulness, their goodness went out to meet his usefulness, his goodness, met and were friends. Who could bind their sweet influences or restrain them in the exercise of their kind offices? No one. Not one. Certainly not a shadow from the past. The room was perfectly quiet. Street sounds reached it only as a low, continuous hum, infinitely reassuring. Mr. Rumbold fell asleep. He dreamed that he was a boy again, living in his old home in the country. He was possessed in the dream by a master passion. He must collect firewood whenever and wherever he saw it. He found himself one autumn afternoon in the wood-house. That was how the dream began. The door was partly open, admitting a little light, but he couldn't recall how he got in. The floor of the shed was littered with bits of bark and thin twigs, but with the exception of the chopping block, which he knew could not be used, there was nowhere a log of sufficient size to make a fire. Though he didn't like being in the wood-house alone, he stayed long enough to make a thorough search, but he could find nothing. The compulsion he knew so well descended on him, and he left the wood-house and went into the garden. His steps took him to the foot of a high tree, standing by itself in a tangle of long grass at some distance from the house. The tree had been lopped. For half its height it had no branches, only leafy tufts sticking out at irregular intervals. He knew what he would see when he looked up into the dark foliage, and there, sure enough, it was. A long dead bough, bare in patches where the bark had peeled off, and crooked in the middle, like an elbow. He began to climb the tree. The ascent proved easier than he expected. His body seemed no weight at all, but he was visited by a terrible oppression which increased as he mounted. The bough did not want him. It was projecting its hostility down the trunk of the tree, and every second brought him nearer to an object which he had always dreaded. A growth, people called it. It stuck out from the trunk of the tree, a huge circular swelling, thickly matted with twigs. Victor would rather have died than hit his head against it. By the time he reached the bough, twilight had deepened into night. He knew what he had to do. Sit astride the bough, since there was one near by which he could reach it, and press it with his hands until it broke. Using his legs to get what purchase he could, he set his back against the tree and pushed with all his might downwards. To do this, he was obliged to look down beneath him, and he saw far below him, on the ground, a white sheet spread out, as though to catch him, and he knew at once that it was a shroud. Frantically he pulled and pushed at the stiff, brittle bough. A lust to break it took hold of him. Leaning forward his whole length, he seized the bough at the elbow joint and strained it away from him. As he cracked, he toppled over, and the shroud came rushing upwards. Mr. Rumbold waked in a cold sweat to find himself clutching the curved arm of the chair on which the waiter had set his brandy. The glass had fallen over, and the spirit lay in a little pool on the leather seat. I can't let it go like that, he thought. I must get some more. A man he did not know answered the bell. Waiter, he said, bring me a brandy and soda in my room in a quarter of an hour's time. Rumbold, the name is. He followed the waiter out of the room. The passage was completely dark except for a small blue gas jet, beneath which was huddled a cluster of candlesticks. The hotel, he remembered, maintained an old-time habit of deference towards darkness. As he held the wick to the gas jet, he heard himself mutter, "Here is a candle to light you to bed." But he recollected the ominous conclusion of the distich, and fuddled as he was, he left it unspoken. Shortly after Mr. Rumbold's retirement, the doorbell of the hotel rang. 3 sharp peals and no pause between them. "Someone in a hurry to get in?" the night porter grumbled to Clutsam, who was on duty till midnight. "Expect he's forgotten his key." He made no haste to answer the summons. It would do the forgetful fellow good to wait, teach him a lesson. So dilatory was he, that by the time he reached the hall door the bell was tinkling again. Irritated by such importunity, he deliberately went back to set straight a pile of newspapers before letting this impatient devil in. To mark his indifference, he even kept behind the door while he opened it, so that his first sight of the visitor only took in his back. But this limited inspection sufficed to show that the man was a stranger and not a guest at the hotel. In the long black cape, which fell almost sheer one side and the other stuck out as though he had a basket under his arm, he looked like a crow with a broken wing. A bald-headed crow, thought the porter, for there's a patch of bare skin between that white linen thing and his hat. "Good evening, sir," he said. "What can I do for you?" The stranger made no answer, but glided to a side table and began turning over some letters with his right hand. "Are you expecting a message?" asked the porter. "No," the stranger replied. "I want a room for the night." "Was you the gentleman who telephoned for a room this evening?" "Yes." "In that case, I was to tell you we're afraid you can't have one. The hotel's booked right up." "Are you quite sure?" asked the stranger. "Think again." "Them's my orders, sir. It don't do me no good to think." At this moment the porter had a curious sensation, as though some important part of him, his life, maybe, had gone adrift inside him and was spinning round and round. The sensation ceased when he began to speak. I'll call a waiter, sir," he said. But before he called, the waiter appeared, intent on an errand of his own. "I say, Bill," he began, "what's the number of Mr. Rumbold's room? He wants a drink taken up, and I forgot to ask him." "It's 33, said the porter unsteadily, the double room." "Why, Bill, what's up?" the waiter exclaimed. You look as though you've seen a ghost." Both men stared round the hall and then back at each other. The room was empty. "God," said the porter, "I must have had the horrors. But he was here a moment ago. Look at this." On the stone flags lay an icicle an inch or two long, around which a little pool was fast collecting. "Why, Bill," cried the waiter, "how did that get there? It's not freezing." "He must have brought it," the porter said. They looked at each other in consternation, which changed into terror as the sound of a bell made itself heard, coming from the depths of the hotel. "Clutsam's there," whispered the porter. "He'll have to answer it, whoever it is." Clutsam had taken off his tie and was getting ready for bed. What on earth could anyone want in the lounge at this hour? He pulled on his coat and went upstairs. Standing by the fire, he saw the same figure whose appearance and disappearance had so disturbed the porter. "Yes, sir," he said. "I want you to go to Mr. Rumbold," said the stranger, "and ask him if he's prepared to put the other bed in his room at the disposal of a friend." In a few moments Clutsam returned. "Mr. Rumbold's compliments, sir, and he wants to know who it is." The stranger went to the table at the centre of the room. An Australian newspaper was lying on it, which Clutsam hadn't noticed before. The aspirant to Mr. Rumbold's hospitality turned over the pages. Then, with his finger, which appeared even to Clutsam standing by the door unusually pointed, he cut out a rectangular slip about the size of a visiting card, and moving away, motioned the waiter to take it. By the light of the gas jet in the passage, Clutsam read the excerpt. It seemed to be a kind of obituary notice, but of what possible interest could it be to Mr. Rumbold to know that the body of Mr. James Hagberd had been discovered in circumstances which suggested that he had met his death by violence? After a long interval, Clutsam returned, looking puzzled and a little frightened. "Mr. Rumbold's compliments, sir, but he knows no one of that name." "Then take this message to Mr. Rumbold," said the stranger. "Say, would he rather that I went up to him, or that he came down to me?" For the third time Clutsam went to do the stranger's bidding. He did not, however, upon his return, open the door of the smoking-room, but shouted through it, "Mr. Rumbold wishes you to hell, sir, where you belong, and says, come up if you dare." Then he bolted. A minute later, from his retreat in an underground coal cellar, he heard a shot fired. Some old instinct, danger-loving or danger-disregarding, stirred in him, and he ran up the stairs quicker than he'd ever run up them in his life. In the passage he stumbled over Mr. Rumbold's boots. The bedroom door was ajar. Putting his head down, he rushed in. The brightly lit room was empty, but almost all the movables in it were overturned, and the bed was in a frightful mess. The pillow, with its 5-fold perforation, was the first object on which Clutsam noticed bloodstains. Thenceforward he seemed to see them everywhere. But what sickened him, and kept him so long from going down to rouse the others, was the sight of an icicle on the window-sill, a thin claw of ice curved like a Chinaman's nail, with a bit of flesh sticking to it. That was the last he saw of Mr. Rumbold, but a policeman patrolling Carrick Street noticed a man in a long black cape who seemed, from the position of his arm, to be carrying something heavy. He called out to the man and ran after him, but though he did not seem to be moving very fast, the policeman could not overtake him. If you like that story, consider supporting me as a patron. That way you help me make more stories for you and get access to a patrons-only library of stories. Lots more hours for you to listen to.
Get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come?
So that was a visitor from Down Under by L.P. Hartley. Now, L.P. Hartley is no stranger to the podcast. We've done various stories by him before, notably W.S., potentially his most famous ghost story, and Someone in the Lift. And he is a guy who sometimes his stories are quite difficult to analyse because, as I say, he leaves a lot. He's a shower, not a teller, so he rarely explains things, and you have to kind of work it out yourself if you're smart enough, which sometimes I'm not. So anyway, here we go. L.P. Hartley, born 1895, born on the 30th of December in Whittlesea, Cambridgeshire. He died in London on 13th December 1972. He was the eldest son of Harry Bark Hartley, a solicitor and justice of the peace, who later ran a brickworks near Peterborough, and Mary Elizabeth Nee Thompson, whose intense concern for her son's health contributed to him being a lifelong hypochondriac. And he was interestingly named after Leslie Stephen, who was the father of Virginia Woolf. Remember Virginia Woolf, I'm going to say something about her in a second. Hartley began writing stories at the age of 11 and developed an early admiration for Edgar Allan Poe. After several changes of school, he was sent to Harrow, very posh English public school, in 1910, where he thrived both academically and socially. He was appointed head boy and won an exhibition to Balliol College, Oxford, or Balliol, I think, to study modern history. In 1916, with the First World War underway, he joined the British Army and received a commission in the Norfolk Regiment in 1917. Although he's from Cambridgeshire. However, a weak heart kept him from seeing active service, and he returned to Oxford to university in 1919, that would be weird, 1909, and graduated in 1921 with a second-class honours. Oh dear. After leaving Oxford, Hartley worked as a reviewer for journals such as The Spectator, Saturday Review, The Athenaeum and The Sketch. He made his own fiction published debut with Night Fears, 1924, a collection of Macabre. short stories. I know somebody's going to say, it's pronounced macabre with no R, but it isn't the way I do it. I'm fond of the R there. Followed by the novella Simonetta Perkins, 1925, set in Venice. His early fiction showed the influence of Poe's Gothic sensibility and the psychological nuance of Henry James. Venice, actually, was a big place for him. Became a creative sanctuary for him from the early 1920s. He spent long periods there, often in the company of friends and servants, and eventually bought a house near the church of San Sebastiano. He even kept a gondola and gondolier. Venice's atmosphere, beauty and psychological charge infused many of his works, most notably Simonetta Perkins, The Boat, 1949, and several short stories. He often described Venice as a place where the self could dissolve more easily into reverie and ambiguity, away from the rigidities of English life. Hartley's literary friendships are wide-ranging. He moved in the circle of Lady Ottoline Morel, she's worth a podcast on her own, and formed lasting connections with C.H.B. Kitchin, Elizabeth Bibesco and Edith Olivier. His closest and most enduring friendship, however, was with Lord David Cecil, whom he described as a great love of his life. Cecil's marriage in 1932 devastated Hartley, though they remained close. Hartley never married. While he was friendly with some in the Bloomsbury set, he was not entirely at home among them. Virginia Woolf, after whose father he was named, reportedly referred to him dismissively as a dull fat man called Hartley, a comment that captures the aesthetic and personal distance between him and that group. There's a picture of him. He doesn't look particularly fat. Though he continued writing short stories throughout the 1930s, Hartley didn't publish a novel until 1944 when he was 49. The Shrimp and Anemone marked the beginning of the Eustace and Hilda trilogy, which continued with The Sixth Heaven, 1946, and Eustace and Hilda, 1947. These novels offered a subtle and often painful dissection of sibling intimacy, social ambition and personal repression. Eustace and Hilda won the James Tate Black Memorial Prize. His next major work, The Boat, 1949, is widely regarded as his most psychologically rich novel, exploring the alienation of a solitary individual returning to wartime England after years of exile, something like our visitor in this story. His most famous work, The Go-Between, 1953, brought him widespread acclaim. The Past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Centred on a young boy caught in an adult drama he cannot fully understand, the novel explores memory, betrayal and the irrevocable loss of innocence. It won the Heinemann Award and was adapted into a successful film by Harold Pinter and Joseph Losey in 1971. In the final decades of his life, Hartley began to address themes that have long remained subterranean in his fiction. My Fellow Devils, 1951, My Sister's Keeper, 1970, and most explicitly The Harness Room, 1971, dealt with male relationships, authority and emerging sexuality. Hartley referred to The Harness Room as his homosexual novel, though he insisted it should be written in a more discreet manner than in many modern novels. The story centres on a young man's relationship with a chauffeur, handled with emotional restraint but unmistakable undertones. It was a late, partial acknowledgement of the tensions that had haunted his personal life and artistic preoccupations. Hartley's sexuality, while never publicly declared, is now widely understood to have been homosexual. His fiction contains recurring themes of suppressed desire, emotional isolation and intense homosocial bonds. I've never heard that word before. His letters and diaries, some of which were destroyed after his death, reveal the internal struggle he faced in reconciling his emotional needs with the social expectations of his class and era. The loneliness and indirectness of many of his protagonists echo this conflict, lending his fiction its peculiar atmosphere of emotional claustrophobia. He spent his later years divided between Venice, a house in Bathford near Bath, and a flat in Rutland Gate, London. He lived with a small staff, maintained his daily habits of swimming and rowing, and grew increasingly disenchanted with modern life. Visitors found him alternately charming, eccentric, and irritable. Sounds like me. He complained of noise, except without the charming. Explained of noise disorder and the vulgarity. He complained of noise disorder and the vulgarity of contemporary culture. Yet he continued to write, reflect, and correspond widely. In recognition of his work, he was appointed CBE in 1956. It's a pity he didn't get a higher honour than that, and named a Companion of Literature by the Royal Society of Literature in 1972. He also published The Novelist's Responsibility, 1967, a collection of critical essays, and collected short stories, 1968, which gathered decades of work. So there we are, that's about him. So, I'm going to switch now to talk particularly about this story. If I can find my notes, here we are. So let us say something about a visitor from down under. So what we've got to say is, first of all, it was published. It's a classic ghost story, absolutely. First published in The Killing Bottle in 1931. Published in the US as The Travelling Grave and Other Stories, 1948. So we know the story. We know what happens. First of all, we have the what you're saying, Tony. First of all, we have the bus interlude. I was kind of looking at the beat by beat breakdown of it, because there was some issues from memory doing this. And let's face it, I've only just recorded it, so it's not a massive feat of memory. So here we have a wet and foggy evening in London. So that line, wet and foggy, reoccurs in the recitation of the children's rhyme Gathering Nuts in May, doesn't it? When James Hagbard is going to be sent to get our man. We don't know any of these people yet, but that is a lovely echo. He knew what he was doing, you know, and so that line, wet and foggy evening, is echoed later on. And we have a kind of, it's not quite a frame, it's not a frame story, because it's not, listen, tell me what I'll tell you what somebody told me. It's not a frame story, but there's a kind of prequel. You get this in modern detective fiction, don't you? Very often, modern thrillers, we have a prequel. And this is this. And so the bus conductor, it's like a little cameo of him. He's quite well drawn, I thought, but remind me of, they don't really have bus conductors anymore due to progress, I believe they call it. And but you know, they used to be chatty dudes and dudettes, and anyway, so we get the idea that this is a weird guy. This is monstrous. This is almost like something from a Hammer horror film, isn't it? He's just really unpleasant, and he's cold, and he has to get the ticket. And those would be in those paper. I was thinking when I was reciting it, whatever I was doing, and there was a machine that used to turn a handle, and it would turn this paper ticket. Was perforated. They'd break the perforator and they'd give you the ticket. That lasted for a long time, and they'd have it. They would have it on straps and carry it around. It's probably the same all over the world. Anyway, so I was seeing that. So that's like a cameo thing. It's introduced to. And it's sort of like opens loops. Remember, the key task of an author is to open loops, because if you've got no open loops, people don't want to read on. So the question here is, that we've opened and not answered, is, who is this strange man? And we have some clues that he's supernatural, rather than just being unpleasant. One is his unnatural coldness, and the fact he disappears without coming past the bus conductor. So that's our setup, really, isn't it? And then Carrick Street, we get mentioned Carrick Street. We later learn why Carrick Street's important. So this is the guy, this is the vengeful spirit. This is like Don Giovanni, isn't it, in the Mozart opera. Don't Speak to Me Again is really interesting. I mean, he's a bit unpleasant throughout everybody, and his interactions with kind of ordinary working people. So the porter, the waiter, the klutzer, and the bus conductor, and he's rather rude. And then we get the time shift, and so here we get Rumbold, who's come back from Australia. Now, in most stories, people who go to Australia in these stories, they always come back millionaires, and with their successes. There was another story like that, I can't remember what it was. I should jump aside and say, of course, the plot of this story is pretty similar to Afterward by Edith Wharton, i.e. People are in England, something happened, a murder, and some nasty business in a foreign country far away, and the ghost comes across the wide Atlantic, or the wide, quite a lot of seas to get from Australia, quite a lot of oceans, to enact its revenge. And of course, in that, it's classically being a classic vengeful ghost. And those bits are normal. So we have him come to the hotel. It's a home from home. He's relaxed. It's just the same old place. It's a bit kind of gothic-y, which again is probably borrowing it. If it had been a bright modern hotel, it wouldn't have been quite as spooky, would it? Reminded me of the tap room in Ghost of Jerry Bundler. See, all these stories all resonate now, but it's an awesome of Ringing the Changes. Aikman's hotel and Ringing the Changes not quite as grim as that hotel, to be honest. So that's all normal, and then of course we have Klutzer. They have this conversation. what I want to say is that Hartley does not explain. Now, you remember just Christmas last, I did someone in the lift. Same thing. Hartley doesn't explain everything. He just sets out what happened, like he observed it, and you kind of have to work it out. And I struggled to work it out. That one, I was like, what was that all about? And then some sharp, perspicacious listener said, "No, Tony, mate, it's this." And oh, yeah, of course it is. And he does this in this one as well. He doesn't explain it. E.F. Benson, for all that I like him, is a tremendous explainer. He's at his best when he doesn't explain, but he will put explanations in of, this is happening because this, and he sets the scene, not sets the scene, but explains the scene for you. Whereas Hartley doesn't do that. We've done W.S. by Hartley as well, and he just sets it out. So we have the scene on the bus. We none of it's explained. What happened in Australia? Who was James Hagbard? We're never told. It's just all alluded to. So, except what I'm going to say is, and I think this is part of that technique, Clutsam, he's not a comic character, but he's bordering on one of Shakespeare's mechanicals. He sets out, if someone, what was a bizarre conversation to have, if you murdered somebody and if they would come and get you, they would have to, but there isn't anybody, then the ghost himself would have to come and get you. So that is kind of explaining the story. I thought that was a bit on the nose, but possibly, I think we might have got that even if Clutsam hadn't explained it, but anyway, it's a minor quibble. So we have some weird stuff going on, which I'm like, and this is like, he does this, there's weird interludes in all his stories, almost surreal, not quite, I'm thinking of, I did a story called Under the Sign of the Hourglass by Bruno Schultz, which is very surreal, and sort of Kafka's surrealness, but it's not, and Robert Aikman has weird bits in the hospice, there are bits that are just like, what's going on here? It's not that you disbelieve it, it's just this is unpleasant. So there's definitely an Aikman resonance in this. So what I'm talking about is this children's party with a BBC, and because he doesn't explain any of this, I'm trying to work out what on earth's going on, and of course I can get it wrong. So it seems to me that there was a children's party and there was some kind of fallout in which Victor Rumbold, our man, came a cropper or was done down, and at the hands of James Hagbard. Now he uses these nursery rhymes, particularly these ones that relate to the Black Death and things like that, and they're always a bit sinister. They're always put a bit of sinister in. I think Sapphire and Steel use them in episode 2, which is the best one. No, episode 1, where it's the time thing with the kids and they arrive and there's this house where the clocks are all... Sapphire and Steel's great. Joanna Lumley and David... McLean, no, he's just died. He was a great man as well. Ilya Kuryakin, he played Man from U.N.C.L.E. Is that? I don't know. Anyway, I can't keep everything in my head, can I? So... these nursery rhymes are, and I think Doctor Who's used them as well. And so, is that that's going on? I don't know. And then there's a chopper to chop off your head, chop, chop, chop. So what I take from that is he was wrongly done by, and he got him back in Australia, many miles away from home, and he murdered him when this guy was vulnerable. This James Hagbard was vulnerable, and James Hagbard's come back to get his revenge. That's what I think the story's about, in essence. Now, what was I going to say? The Mutts in May, you can't help, but I also, when he talks about unseasonal, I can't remember, botanical something, but the point is, of course, there aren't any nuts in May. That's the whole point about we go gathering nuts in May. No, you won't. There aren't any. Nuts come in the autumn. And in hawthorn, May. No, I'm getting all mixed up now. Never mind. But what I'm saying is there are no nuts in May in Hartley. But I don't know if that's just Hartley going, yeah, this is a stupid song because of this, or it is relevant to the story now. And he's taken aback by this. He starts off with this kind of reverie about the past, and it makes him quite unwell. And this thing about law, so yeah, this is jumping back to that. It's expressed as a natural law almost. The revenge of a ghost. The ghost will come and make things right. That is a very old theme in ghost stories, and it's like a moral law from beyond the grave. Another thing I didn't really understand was this: he has to go and collect firewood. What's that about? Maybe, but James Hagbard isn't there then, and he looks at this, and I thought, well, okay, this is a foreshadowing that he's going to hang himself from this tree branch, but he climbs up, and he has to get rid of this growth, and then he falls into the shroud, that's on the ground. Do you know, when I was doing my story Ashridge, I was very conscious of just letting things come up from the unconscious, as it were, and not explaining what they were, and letting it speak, even though it was really opaque. And it strikes me, unless somebody can explain what this is about, I just don't get that. And then, of course, the ghost comes, and then we're in proper Gothic. We are Don Giovanni territory in this time. The ghost comes, and the icicle. He's cold, this man. What's the icicle about? Is it just a symbolism of his otherworldliness? And then, of course, we have the final scene whereby, send this message, I'll go up and see him if he won't come down. And here it is, the obituary of and then the cards are on the table. Then we've got a pretty close understanding of what's going on. So I think that's, to me, what the story's about. Is there anything else I want to say? We talked about ghosts as agents of justice, definitely showing without telling in terms of his craft. Sometimes I felt, because I felt a bit at sea sometimes with some of these scenes, maybe we could have had a little bit of exposition and explaining what's going on. I think that they're relevant to the story. They increase the atmosphere. Is the Gothic hotel, the description of the ice cold ghost, the children's rhymes. They're all just like spooky elements you might want to put in if you're writing a story. Because I mean, and the weather, of course, the weather is miserable. Because I told you I read, for a scary story, I was going to say I'm looking at a book called Lost in the Garden, which I recommended by Adam S. Leslie, which is a modern novel. It's set in an eternal summer. It's a weird tale set in an eternal summer. It's not a horror story as such. There's some horrifying bits in it, but I think for a proper Gothic, you need to have the weather. You need to have the Gothic edifice, whether it be a castle, in this case a hotel, a house, a monastery. Indeed. So, and I think I've covered all my notes. So, you're talking about this dream sequence. Is it a ritual reenactment of his crime and the death that awaits him? Was him cutting the growth out? But it's very symbolic in that case, and I don't get it. And also, right, another thing which was, I don't know what that meant, was he arrives, the ghost arrives, he's got something under his cape, the porter notices this. I love the depiction of the hotel. I've worked in hotels when I was younger, and that kind of, who the hell's calling me at this time? And he's going to ring, we're going to make him ring again, the bugger. And if he's got the temerity to ring me at this time, and he can wait, I'm not going to answer the door straight away. That was really well observed, I thought. So on the bus I don't think it's mentioned he has anything under his cape. He's certainly seen with something under his cape, and at the very last scene he's seen this figure, hooded cloaked figure, is seen escaping with something under it, heavy. And I wasn't sure, we talk about the perforations and the blood. Is the body there? It isn't described. Does that mean that he's taken the body with him, or is it just Hartley refusing to give us what we want, and just making us work a bit like he does with everything else? I don't know. I thought it was and also struck by the fact that he used a hotel as he did with someone in the lift. These hotels as liminal spaces, spaces where people come and go, come and go. I mean, there are certain people that belong there, there's staff, but everybody else is like a ghost going back and forwards. I think they're great places for stories, hotels. I think that's probably all I want to say about it. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. What would I give it? I'd give it an A-. How about that? An A-, mainly because I don't understand it all. But so I'm thinking, I better give it a good mark, because just in case I look thick. But no, A-, I think. Oh yeah, I remember. I'm doing this story coaching and symbolic analysis thing called the uncanny mirror. So you come to me with a bit of a story that you just can't get out of your head. Maybe a dream. You may not have written it yet. You may have written it, but there's something about this story, and we look at the story, what it means. We look at it kind of psychologically. We look at archetypally. We look at what the words mean, what the names mean, what the etymology is. What is the story saying? What is the story that you want to say? And why is that story? And that's the first module. We have a chat on Zoom. I give you a couple of documents. I give you a voice note, and that's the first module. Then, if you want to kind of take the story through to perhaps being on this podcast and certainly making it publishable, those are future or improving the quality anyway. Those are the future, because nobody can guarantee publication unless I publish it for you, which if the story's good, I would certainly consider that. Anyway, it's a paid service, of course, so if you're interested, just drop me a line at classicghostpodcast@gmail.com. classicghostpodcast@gmail.com. The Uncanny Mirror Project.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?